Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. Hope everyone's doing good. It is 10:41 on a Tuesday morning. I guess it's snowing. I just got a text from a friend who lives down in New Hampshire, and she sent me some photos, and it's totally freaking snowing. It was like, what the hell? It's pretty gray and overcasty here in Mid-Coast Maine. I'm hoping we don't get it, but man, it's crazy, crazy. So yeah, I hope everyone's doing good. The summer is slowly approaching. Been watching a shit ton of movies. I watch a lot of movies anyway, but I watched a ton of movies just over the course of a few days. Friday, I went to the movies with some friends and we saw the new Ryan Gosling movie, Project Hail Mary, which was a pretty good movie. Not sure if it was as good as some people are saying, and I did like it a lot. There were some things around it that I should say I had some issues with it. So check out that video. I thought it was as a movie as a whole overall, like the experience of going to see it in the theater was really cool. So so that was Friday, and then Saturday I rented went to Opera House Video and rented some movies because it was a holiday weekend coming up, and I was going to go to my folks on Sunday for Easter, and typically whenever we do a gathering, a dinner thing over at my folks, especially on the holidays, we usually always have a big meal, and then of course we always sit and watch movies. On holiday weekends or holiday gatherings, it tends to be a little bit. We tend to watch more movies, like at least two. Christmas time or Thanksgiving, we've been known to watch like three or four movies in one sitting. But typically, it's usually at least two on the holiday weekend kind of excursions. We usually do a big dinner and kind of relax, have some dessert, and then we start fire up the movies. During the and other times, other than that, if I just go over there for dinner, I always bring at least one movie, and usually for those little adventures, I usually just bring one movie. But so I went to Opera House Video and rented some movies. I got the new Osgood Perkins movie, Keeper, which is going to be today's show, and then I also got RoboCop 2, which I had not seen since I was a kid, years ago. And then I also rented Charles Bronson's Death Wish, the first one. Amazing classic movie. I just watched that last night. I seen that movie probably, well, I had rented it at Opera House, I guess, a few years ago. I don't own that movie. I don't own any of the Death Wish franchise movies, which I really really want to get. I'm a massive Charles Bronson fan, and it's such a classic. I definitely want to get an upgrade. I saw it on DVD, so so that was what I did Saturday, and then Saturday night I decided to watch because I hadn't seen RoboCop 2 in so long, and RoboCop the original is one of my all-time favorite science fiction movies. I decided to do double duty and watch 1 and 2, which was super awesome. I have the first RoboCop on Blu-ray, and then I watched the second one on DVD. And then so that was two more movies that I watched on Saturday. And then Sunday, which was Easter, we when I went over to my folks, we ended up talking a lot about what was really me. I ended up bringing up UFOs and UAPs and started talking about all things related to that because that's something I'm really interested in and just been fascinated with, especially lately with all the new things that have been coming out. So my mom was like, "Hey, why don't we watch Signs with Mel Gibson?" I was like, "You know what? That's a cool idea." So we kept with the whole UFO thing, and we ended up watching Signs, which is a pretty long movie, close to 3 hours, but fantastic movie. That's a movie that just gets better and better for me all the time. And then after that, we watched the Osgood Perkins movie, Keeper, which was a super bummer. And then yesterday I watched Death Wish. I watched a pile of movies. That's I don't know, kind of average for me, but I don't I usually watch a movie a night. I usually always do that. That's always my go-to, my way to kind of chill out at the end of the night or end of the day. That's usually what I always go for. If I get home like, past 10 o'clock or 10:30, 11 o'clock, I typically won't put in a movie at that point because I'm a little bit tired or fatigued. I don't usually do that. Maybe on a weekend, but generally I don't. I usually, at that point, will just catch up on some videos I've been watching on YouTube. YouTube is my thing that I like a lot, so usually, if my concentration level, especially at that hour where it's, kind of getting late or later, I will like listen to some podcasts that I have been, watching some interviews or watch some music videos, and then I usually crash out. Occasionally I'll watch a movie late, but I like to be fairly alert and awake when I watch a movie, so I typically will watch a movie earlier. My typical time to throw in a movie during the week is about 9:15, 9:20 to be exact. I know that sounds kind of silly that I have an exact time, but I typically will usually watch a movie at night, and I usually throw the movie in about quarter after 9, 9:20, 9:30, around there. The reason I do it, the reason I usually go about putting the movie in at that time, the reason I usually put a movie in usually around that time, and that's usually during the week, is because I try to get a lot of work done here at the house with music stuff. So I usually, like my typical day, a normal day, what is normal these days? But a normal day is I get up in the morning and then I, have some coffee. I'm really into audiobooks now, so I usually do that for a while, a little bit in the morning. It takes me a while to kind of get motivated, but I usually get up, have the audiobook going. Right now I'm listening to the complete works of all of the Sherlock Holmes books, including the short stories, and that's super awesome. I'm really enjoying it. But typically I do the audiobook thing in the morning, have some coffee, wake up a little bit, and then I'll transition from the audiobook space, and then I'll start listening to music for a while. I got this really nice. It was one of the best things I think I've bought that I've gotten for myself. But I got this really nice Bluetooth speaker last year now, but not that long ago. But I was really late to the game with Bluetooth, and so I usually use this all the time, and it's super cool. I love it. I love it because, well, it sounds really great with music. I am a physical media guy, so I typically have CDs in my car. I'm mostly mostly a CD guy. I also do have a cassette player that actually works pretty well, so I do listen to cassettes, but mainly in my car and anywhere else I listen to CDs, and I still buy CDs. But a lot of the times in the morning, I listen to a lot of music on YouTube or Bandcamp. I use a lot, and I usually use my Bluetooth speaker for that. So I typically will do that. I'll listen to music stuff for a while, and then have some more coffee, and then do some Film Fanatic stuff where I'll start doing some videos about getting the video set up. That I usually record them always the day before. So what I'll do while I'm listening to music is I'll set up, get the video ready, upload it, and then get the photos and all that stuff, and then I'll upload that, and then I usually will, shortly after that, I will record another video, usually for Film Fanatic, do another video around that. And I usually always do a video like kind of the night before or the day before, the morning before. So after I usually do the video, what I end up doing is music stuff around uh, booking booking scenarios, like where for for most of the time, at least for me, as far as booking gigs and trying to get things rolling in that area, I do all the booking for my band Quantum. So I'm usually pretty busy a good portion of the morning where I'm, sending out emails or responding to emails, or if I do have something and I hear back from a club owner or a booking agent or what have you, or a few other bands that I play in, if they have a gig that they're asking me about, I usually do all of that stuff in the morning, and get do that for a while, and then I usually start my day as far as practicing, and that takes up a few hours in the morning. So I usually will then go into the practice space for a few hours, take a little bit of a breakfast break, have a breakfast kind of thing, and then go back to working on music stuff and practice, and then usually do try to do a little exercise, and then I chill out for a while. Give myself 35 minutes, 40 minutes to kind of just chill out and not do anything. Then I take a shower and get ready for work, and then go to school, go to work, and then come home, and then usually get home about 5:36. Then I usually when I come home, I usually chill out for a little bit, take a little nap, make some tea, and then I go back into the practice space for for another for another decent chunk of time, and then I usually knock off. I usually call it a day by about 9:15. Then I come inside, and then it's movie time. So that's a typical day for me. When I'm just doing kind of my normal routine during the week. So, but getting back to the main topic of today's video, again, I want to thank. I've gotten some new subscribers. It was really funny. We here at Film Fanatic headquarters, we hit 666 subscribers, which I thought was hilarious. So I did a little post on that. I thought that was pretty funny. And it was right, I think it was on Saturday, the day before Easter, so good timing. Anyway, I watched the new Osgood Perkins movie, Keeper. So I'm going to be talking about that, kind of a review. And again, I want to thank. We've gotten some new subscribers in the last few weeks or last week, and got a lot of new comments on a lot of the videos. I really appreciate the support. Can't do this weirdness without you guys. So very very grateful. Anyway, so I do like Osgood Perkins quite a bit. I think he is a very interesting director. He of course, Osgood Perkins is actually the son of Anthony Perkins, Norman Bates, which is wild. I remember when the first time I heard of Osgood Perkins as a director slash writer was through that film that came out a couple of years ago, Longlegs, with Nicolas Cage. That movie was so hyped up. I I almost saw Longlegs in the theater, and I don't know, like it it was funny. That movie was there were some people out there that really liked the film and some people that didn't really like it. And I that seems to be a thing with Osgood Perkins's films in general. Not that I would say he's a polarizing director. I just think, he's just one of those directors that has a kind of an interesting style, and it's either your jam or not. I don't know. Like, it seems to be, from what I gather, like some people really like his work. I overall, for myself, I like his do like his films, the films of his that I've seen, with the exception of Keeper. But anyway, I noticed there's kind of this polar, somewhat extreme thing around people who like his films and the people who don't. Like with Longlegs, I heard a lot of, that movie had a massive campaign when it came out. It was all over the internet. Kind of reminded me of kind of the classic campaign of the Blair Witch Project. I mean, they just had so many ads, so many the trailers actually looked really good. There was this whole big kind of thing online. The movie had such a big presence online that you couldn't be a person that didn't hear of this film. They just had this massive campaign, really good marketing strategy. So, but I knew a couple people that saw Longlegs, and I almost was going to see it. And I had someone who told me that he went to see it, and he really actually hated the film. And I was going to go to see it in the theater. I was actually excited to see it in the theater because I love Nicolas Cage. He's my man. He's my favorite guy, favorite actor, pretty much of all time. And this person I know tried to, well, more or less talked me out of it. He's like, don't really waste your time. This movie is just bogus. It's bullshit, and it's not really about anything. It's kind of this joke. And he just really tore it apart. And he said so many negative things about it that it just bummed me out. And then I didn't end up seeing it. And I had, chances to see it, and it got a lot of press. It was playing in the local theaters for quite a while, but I kind of got talked out of seeing it, so I never ended up going, which doesn't usually happen. So it was just funny. And then it eventually, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months later, came out on DVD, and that's when I first saw it. And it was actually, I saw it with my folks, and so, and I remember hearing, a lot about this movie and all of the hype around it. And I thought it looked pretty interesting. It was, it's like kind of a serial killer based film. It looked a lot like, and I had heard it was compared a lot to Silence of the Lambs, but it was more of a, kind of a supernatural, occult based film, definitely a horror film. And when I found out who Osgood Perkins was, I was like, wow, like that's pretty crazy. When I found out he is Anthony Perkins' son, Norman Bates, I was just like, wow, like that's crazy. That's kind of interesting. And I saw a couple of interviews, and this was before I actually saw Longlegs. I saw a couple of interviews with Nicolas Cage and also the cast of Longlegs and with Osgood Perkins, and I really dug what he had to say. I thought he was just kind of this interesting, really smart, kind of quirky, kind of strange guy, and I just liked his whole kind of thing, his whole demeanor, how he described what films were for him and movies that he loved, and his kind of whole, way that he likes to shoot films and tell stories. So it just really intrigued me. And so I ended up renting Longlegs at world famous Opera House Video in Belfast, and I brought it over to my folks. We had dinner or something. I don't think it was a holiday weekend or weekend night, but we ended up watching it over there, and we all really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. I thought it was pretty creepy. It had a really cool vibe. It was interesting and went into some really interesting directions. I kind of dug it. I was kind of into it, and then I ended up getting it on Blu-ray from Santa Claus, which was really nice. And I've only watched it once, but I do have Longlegs on Blu-ray. And then I think it was early. When the hell was it? It wasn't that long ago, but I ended up going to see with a friend. I ended up going to see The Monkey, which was also directed by Osgood Perkins. And I liked Longlegs quite a bit. I thought it was a real interesting movie. It was kind of one of my favorite movies of last year. So, ended up going to see The Monkey, and I actually really enjoyed that film as well. I thought and it's, it was an adaptation of a Stephen King short story, but I thought it was cool. I dug it. I dug it quite a bit. super gory and bonkers, kind of bonkers crazy. I kind of felt like it had a grindhouse influence. But again, with that film as well, I knew people that didn't really like that film that much. They thought it was, you know, it kind of fell apart towards the third act. And then I also came across people who really liked it. The same kind of thing around Longlegs, and that's fine. But I actually really enjoyed it. And up until that point, the one movie that he had put out, which I still haven't seen, which I do want to see, which I heard was a really good movie as well, and I believe it's called The Black Coat's Daughter, which is another kind of supernatural. I think it's kind of like a ghost story, but it was, I believe, Osgood Perkins' first film. So, which I haven't seen, and I do want to see it. It's kind of on my radar. I haven't been able to find it anywhere. But I'm looking for it, and it's definitely on my radar. I don't believe that Opera House Video carries it. So, but the last film of his that I saw, which I saw in the theater, was The Monkey, and I really enjoyed it. And at the very end, we end up. I typically stay through the credits when I'm home watching a movie. I usually, when the movie's over, I will usually, you know, take the movie out, or I will just go right to the special features. That's typically what I do. A lot of the times I'll go to the special features and watch like a documentary about that movie. But usually if I'm at the theater, I will stay to the very very end with the full credits. You know, occasionally I do that at home, but generally I don't. But when we saw The Monkey, I went with a friend, and I can't remember when it was. It wasn't that long ago. I think it was technically, oh man, might have been technically last year at this point, but it was a little while ago. And at the end of The Monkey, there was this trailer for for another Osgood Perkins film called Keeper, and he has been, you know, kind of this sensation as a director lately as far as his popularity. Longlegs was a huge hit. It made a shit ton of money in the box office. The Monkey, I believe, made a pretty good amount of money, but Longlegs was a real big hit, and that really, you know, I think put him on the map. Black Coat's Daughter, I think, was a little bit more of an indie kind of hit, but commercially, Longlegs was a pretty big hit. So there was this whole big thing where you kept hearing about, you know, this all these new projects, and I had heard going into The Monkey that he was working on two or three movies at a time, like just cranking out movies left and right, which was crazy. So, and granted, there hasn't been, you know, between Longlegs, The Monkey, and The Keeper, barely a year in between that, in between those three projects, which is crazy. So we stayed it to the end, and then this trailer came up, and I was like, "Wow, the trailer looked awesome." And I'm like, What is this?" And I didn't know it was an Osgood Perkins film, and we were both sitting there. Me and my friend Aaron we sat right through the trailer, and we're like, "Wow, like that looks creepy as hell. It looks really good. It looked really atmospheric. Really, really didn't know what it was about. It looked like kind of the scenario of these young people in this cabin in the woods, and they start having all of these weird encounters with some kind of, you know, supernatural force. But it looked really good. It looked really creepy. The music was great, really atmospheric. And then at the end of the trailer, and it was a teaser trailer, like it was a really good trailer because it made me really interested in seeing the movie, but it didn't give anything away. Like I didn't know what it was about. It just looked really creepy, and it looked pretty scary. It kind of had a little bit of a Longlegs vibe. So then at the end of it, it said this was a new film written and directed. I think he wrote it or co-wrote it, but he definitely directed it. And it said a new film by Osgood Perkins, and I was like, holy shit, that's crazy. And this was right after watching The Monkey, which I really liked. My friend Erin was kind of like, I liked it, but she had problems with it, you know. She didn't like it as much as I did. But anyway, so I was like, holy shit, that's crazy. That's like, how many movies is this guy doing, you know? And I just heard recently he has another movie coming out, I think this year, which is crazy. So, The Keeper was a movie, and it came out, and again, I can't remember exactly how long ago I saw the trailer, but it wasn't that long ago, and I do believe it was 2025, late 2025. So, months went by, and I saw that The Keeper came out. And I didn't hear all that much about it. It didn't, in comparison to, say, the marketing campaign for Long Legs, everything else, like even the promotion and trailers for The Monkey, I don't know, it seemed pretty low key. The Monkey got a lot of promotion, and I did see trailers for it, and people were talking about it, but not as didn't have the buzz or the amount of, it wasn't out and about as much as the whole campaign was for Longlegs. But for The Keeper, I didn't hear anything about it. I knew it was out and it was in theaters, but I didn't hear anything. It was very low key, and I was like, "Huh, that's kind of surprising," because he is, kind of this all of a sudden the toast of the town as far as the director. But I didn't, see much about it. And then I saw a couple of reviews for the movie because I wasn't sure if I was gonna. I didn't think I was gonna have time. The time frame when The Keeper would come out, I don't think I had time or was gonna be able to see it in the theater. But I was interested in seeing it because I liked his work quite a bit. So in that downtime, I ended up checking out a couple of reviews for The Keeper and hearing more things about it. And unfortunately, the things that I had heard about this movie were pretty bad. Were pretty bad. You know, it was basically described by some critics as this movie that was a pretty decent setup. It had kind of a cool premise, and it was kind of a cool thing around kind of the aspect of like world building. But ultimately, the story and where the movie went, it was just kind of this mess, and it didn't really go anywhere, and it just really fell apart. And critics are critics. I try to always go into things, with an open mind. I don't think, and I've talked about this before. It doesn't, checking out reviews or what have you about a film. It doesn't usually, as I've gotten older, it doesn't usually affect my whole um, opinion or experience when I go to see the movie. It usually doesn't. But I knew I wasn't going to see it. By the time I saw these reviews, I was already out of the theater. The Keeper was not in. It did get a theatrical run, but it was not in the theater nowhere near as long as The Monkey or even, especially Longlegs. Both of those movies, especially Longlegs, that was a huge hit. That was in the theaters for quite a while, and it was maybe 3 or 4 months when it got a physical release with DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K. And I think the same thing with The Monkey. But as far as I know, The Keeper did not have a long run in the theaters. It didn't do very well in the box office. And I heard a lot of negative things about it, but I was like, well, I want to see it anyway. I did hear lots of negative, along with a lot of positive reviews around Longlegs and also his other films. And I have heard mostly good things about Blackcoat's Daughter, his first film, but I still haven't seen it. So this past weekend, I rented Keeper, and we watched it over at my folks on Easter. And I have to say, this movie was one of the biggest letdowns and one of the biggest disappointments I that I that as far as a movie goes that I've like recently experienced. This movie was, wow, Super disappointing. And I don't know what the hell happened. You know, that if I had heard stories, I had heard a story that this movie, The Keeper, was shot, and when they were making this film and they were shooting, and I guess in the midst of them shooting this film and making the movie, that's when the big strike happened, and so it really threw the production into chaos. And so I guess what I had heard that had happened was that they ended up, the studio and Osgood Perkins, they ended up bringing in a bunch of different producers, and they pulled in a bunch of other people to kind of make this movie a thing. And there was this big mad scramble, and they ended up getting all these different people. There were reshoots, different actors. It was just chaos. But they ended up, it all ended up happening during the big strike that happened in Hollywood, where, there was a strike that happened a little while ago that caused, a lot of turmoil because of, a lot of actors not getting paid, basically, and getting screwed. So, and it really affected this film, and they ended up, somehow still doing the film, shooting it, and they ended up releasing it. And I had heard that that was one of the reasons that this movie, because of the strike and what that did to the production, that was the reason. This one reviewer in particular was saying that that's the reason that this movie is a mess, because they ended up having to backpedal. They ended up having to do these reshoots. They brought in, different producers, different writers. They changed the script. It was just chaos. But they ended up making the movie and releasing it anyway. And I have to say, this movie is so lost in its own pretentious. Um, it's in its own pretentious way. Like this movie is super pretentious, and it really is it's just a very boring film. I fell asleep twice when I was watching this movie. It's super long. I think it's only the runtime. I believe this movie is like less than 2 hours. I think it's like an hour and 38 minutes, but it felt like it was 2 hours and 38 minutes. This movie totally dragged ass. It's kind of an interesting premise. It kind of involves this witch and this family that, has this curse that's kind of placed on them to a degree, and the whole location takes place in the woods, in this cabin. But the movie has this. The script is really terrible for this movie. This movie has got to be one of the most disappointing films, and it doesn't really go anywhere. Like, it does establish something that's fairly interesting around the story and kind of the location. And it has it establishes this thing, and it has this very, kind of hallucinatory vibe to it, but it doesn't go anywhere. And they really repeat the same kind of tropes, and you basically see the same scenes over and over again. And it has the production value of this movie actually looks really bad too. It's really, it feels like, production wise, compared to other Osgood Perkins films, it feels like they had less money to make this movie. And that's probably due to the strike, I would imagine. But it feels like the production, like they kind of ran out of money. A lot of the kind of the creature effects, if you will, and the practical effects just look really bad. And the thing is with this movie, some people really criticize Osgood Perkins. Like, people who do not really like his films or do criticize his films say that a lot of his stuff is just like, he kind of gets to this point in his stories that he gets, too pretentious, a little bit too lofty, and his head kind of goes up his ass, and it gets in the way of telling a really cohesive story. And unfortunately, I think that's exactly what happens with this movie. It just crawls up its own ass over the course of the movie, and there isn't really a story. They just kind of broadcast the same the same kind of tropes, the same kind of scenes over and over again. And I don't, I just feel like there's something weird about this movie, and not in a good way. It feels like it does feel like this was a film that was started, and then it feels like they stopped, because it feels like everything is off, because there's no real cohesive thing about it. It's very strange. And I really feel like I'm not one. It doesn't happen to me too much, but I literally fell asleep twice throughout this film. Before I put in before we put the movie in, I did check the time of how long this movie is, and it said, I believe it was like an hour and 38 minutes, but it felt like literally it was 2 hours and 38 minutes. It really dragged. It was super slow. It just went on, and it was super pretentious. I didn't like the acting, the cast. It just felt like nobody really slipped into their characters. It felt like they were kind of reading off of their dialogue cards as they were shooting. It was just really off-putting, and it was really pretentious. He tries to, tell this story in this like artful way, but there really isn't much of a story to tell. It doesn't really go anywhere. The kind of the climax of this film involves a lot of makeup effects and practical effects, and they just look really, it just looks really bad. That's why I think, with maybe due to this whole strike predicament that happened during the shooting of this movie, maybe they obviously were, they didn't have the amount of money or the budget that they had going into the movie, because it really shows, and it doesn't work. It's not believable, and I like films that are, kind of on the slower side, the slower pace of things. But holy mackerel, this movie was just, I think it just really dragged ass. It was really pretentious. It didn't go anywhere. There wasn't really a story to really tell. It was kind of an interesting premise, a little bit of an interesting setup, but it felt like the production value was really like half-assed, or a lot less than any of his other films for Osgood Perkins. And it just felt really pretentious, and really, like he, as a director, as a storyteller, was just trying to be grandiose or really lofty, and trying to be really clever, and it just rubbed me the wrong way, because it just seemed really pretentious, and just all bells and whistles, but there was no meat to the bones of the story. Super disappointing, and I don't understand. I was thinking of this last night, thinking about this movie, where, I mean, because Osgood Perkins, again, he's been riding this pretty big wave since Longlegs, and I do like his films. And I will say that this movie was so disappointing that I kind of, for me, as far as my enthusiasm for him, and I'm not trying to be mean or cruel, because I mean, who am I? But I do feel, as a fan of his work, I kind of feel like this film almost kind of diminishes my enthusiasm for him as a director. I don't know what the hell happened. There's been cases of that happening before, where movies that come out that are following, maybe by a really great director, or films in a franchise, where there's like, out of the gate, there's some like incredible things going on, and there might be a situation where there's like a sequel, or and they're just so incredibly bad. There's been cases of where it will diminish for me, the stuff that I really love that they've done. It will lower my feelings. I won't be as even. It will affect that too. A great couple examples of that would be, and I think it's the same thing, same kind of situation, with the Matrix films. I think the first Matrix movie is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, action movie ever directed, ever made, ever conceived. And the other 2 films in the trilogy, or the and then there was the most recent one, I think those movies are just atrocious. And I despise those movies so much that it almost, and they're so disappointing. They were such a letdown that it's, I still regard The Matrix as being an amazing film, but I do think that those other films were so bad that it diminishes my enthusiasm even for The Matrix. Like it's kind of, it's always been here, but after those movies, and even with the most recent one, it's kind of brought it down. My enthusiasm. I don't hold that movie in such high regard anymore, which is weird. Even though I do still think it's a masterpiece, it's affected how I feel about that very movie. And the same thing with George Lucas and the whole Star Wars films. I've always been a big fan of the first three movies, especially Empire Strikes Back. Grew up watching Star Wars. But with all of the movies that have been coming out over the past, freaking 20 years or whatever, and I've just been so incredibly disappointed with the films, it's affected that too, where I don't even hold that film as high anymore because I have felt that everything has gone so wrong since then. And I kind of feel that way with the Keeper, in regards to how I kind of have Osgood Perkins at a certain level of like, at one point I'm like thinking or saying to myself, I kind of think he's one of the best, contemporary horror directors. And now I don't know if I can say that. Because I was so utterly disappointed with this movie. And I don't understand why. I mean, because I don't understand why they would have, given that this movie, and again, what I said about the timing of this movie, supposedly when they were shooting this movie, that's when the strike happened, and it, everything went into chaos. And I do believe that's true, because after watching this movie, it really, I was saying too, like, and I do believe that's true with the circumstances around this film, with them, having to deal with the strike, in the, mid production of Keeper, and it shows. I think it really does show, and it does explain, with what happened with this movie. It just feels like it, started off with legs underneath it, but then the legs were both cut off, and it just fell into a pool of chaos or something. But I don't understand because, in Hollywood and just films and, just in general, why, why, why was this, project, given the circumstances, and, having people's names attached to it and putting money into this movie, getting it distributed, putting it out, putting it in the theaters and then, physical media and everything. It costs a lot of money, but I'm just like, why was this movie not shelved, or why didn't they just, put the movie on the shelf, or just can the production? Because that happens. I mean, that happens, so often with productions and films, of where, they'll start production on a film, something will happen, and then it will, it will get canned because of, maybe somebody gets fired or something happens. That's a typical thing where projects start all the time, but then it's a miracle sometimes that they will be finished. They'll go, go to the finish line and finish, and get an actual release. Like every time a movie gets made, I think it's kind of a miracle, or even a good album, because it's so much work. So, but I don't understand why they didn't take the route of just maybe canning this idea, or just shelving the movie, or just ditching it, instead of putting all this money and time into it. And I'm just really surprised, especially with Osgood Perkins, like why he would want to put his name on this film and just put it out as this thing that's just not a really, it's not a fully realized film. I don't know. I mean, not that I could compare my career to Osgood Perkins at all, but I, in my experience, for what it is, small peanuts. I've been in a lot of different projects, and in this case, like recording projects, where There are a few that I have been in over the years where there was a project going on. It was a big recording project, and the people putting together this project, were putting a lot of money into it, putting a lot of time, a lot of effort, and the recording was going pretty well in the beginning, and things were going, but then you know, and well, a couple of times I've seen it happen where something goes wrong and maybe somebody leaves the project, or they're just not happy with how things are sounding or how they're going. So the plug is pulled, and then the project is just kind of shelved, and then it never sees the light of day, and you just kind of pull off and retract from the project. Like I've seen that happen many times, where you're not going to put out a project, that you're not excited about and that you want to put your name on the top of it. But if you're not happy with it, I've seen that happen. You just people artists will just pull the plug and shelf it, or just can the whole idea. So I don't understand. Yeah, very strange why his name was still attached, and why they persisted on trying to make this work. Very strange. Anyway, I don't recommend The Keeper. Very, very disappointing movie. A movie I was actually looking forward to. So, but I would take a hard pass on this movie. Very disappointing. One of the biggest letdowns that I've seen, as far as a movie goes. Thank God I didn't see this in the theater. So anyway, peace.